Headshot seemed to come from the right front. It seemed to strike him here, and his head went back, and all of the brain matter went out the back of the head. It was like a red halo, a red circle with bright matter in the middle of it. It just went like that. It was a terrible time. You cannot imagine seeing this. You knew it happened, but you didn't want to believe it.
That he had a large, about 7-centimeter opening in the right occipital parietal area. A considerable portion of the brain was missing there, and the occipital cortex, the back portion of the brain, was lying down near the opening of the wound, and blood was trickling out.
Almost a fifth, or perhaps even a quarter, of the right back part of the head in this area here had been blasted out. That involved the half of the right side of the back of the head. My initial impression was that it probably was an exit wound, so it was a very large wound.
This is not what the official autopsy photographs show. Hidden away for a quarter of a century and shown here for the first time, they reveal the back of the head intact.
The autopsy photographs show a massive wound.
When I first saw the pictures of the president's body, so-called wounds, what really struck me was, especially the head wound, they showed a nice little neat round bullet hole in the back of his head. Well, actually what I saw was the whole side of his head blown off. It was gone. I don't know where those things came from, but they're totally wrong. Every one of them.
In 1964, the Warren Commission dealt with this evidence by not looking at it. It was made available to them. They felt if they looked at it, they would have to deal with it and publish it. So they didn't deal with it. In 1977, around that time frame, the House Assassinations Committee had the photographs. What they did with it was even less excusable. They had the photographs, they had the questions that were brought to them about the photographs, and they did not allow the Dallas doctors, the most important witnesses in this particular area of the evidence, to even view them.
Facing the grassy knoll, she took her picture of the president within 1/6 of a second of the fatal headshot. Horrified by the experience, Mary Ann was never to use the camera again.
Mine is a Polaroid, and I can only take one every 10 seconds, and it was at that time whenever I took it.
He was shot?
No, I didn't. I must have snapped it immediately when he slumped, because in the picture that's the way she's there, and he slumped over.
From the moment the president was hit until today, the terrible secret within Mary's picture has remained hidden.
To me, it's kind of frightening to think that this could be, and no one has found it or cared to look for it. I'm talking about our federal agencies, that something could have been there all this time and no one cared to do anything about it.
But someone has. We will reveal for the first time the man whose image has come from within this picture and who fired the shot that killed the President of the United States. Ed Hoffman, a deaf-mute who is interviewed here for the first time.
I'd gotten off work early because I had a dentist's appointment. I was traveling down the freeway here, and I remembered that President Kennedy was coming to visit Dallas. I parked my car here. I realized at this spot that I would be able to see Kennedy pass close by. I stood here and waited, and I was looking towards where he would be coming from. I suddenly saw two men who looked suspicious directly over there in the car park.
25 years ago, these trees did not obscure the view. From his position at the side of the freeway, Ed Hoffman could clearly see the car park area behind the grassy knoll.
I saw a man standing here, wearing a black hat and a blue jacket. I saw a puff of smoke, and I thought it was a cigarette, but it wasn't. He had a gun, and he walked towards the railroad. He tossed the gun to the second man. Then he turned and straightened his jacket, adjusted his hat, and walked casually away. The man with the striped shirt, the railroad shirt, walked over to the electrical box with the gun. He took the gun apart. He put it in a toolbox. He then walked slowly away in the direction of the railroad track. When the motorcade passed by below me here, I realized that Kennedy had been shot. I was horrified. I saw a policeman standing on the railroad bridge, and I tried to get his attention, but he didn't see me. So I got in my car and drove to the area where I had seen the two men. But there were so many people there, and I couldn't find them. I went to the FBI to tell them what I had seen. They didn't want me to say anything. They offered me money to keep quiet. They didn't understand that it was more important for me to tell them what I'd seen. It was hard for me to communicate with them. I do feel that the two men I saw were working together, and that the one with the gun behind the fence was the man who shot President Kennedy.
On that particular morning, what happened was I came downtown and I thought there was going to be a parade. So what I did was I parked my vehicle back here in this parking lot, and I intentionally walked to this particular corner because I wanted to take pictures of the parade off of the railroad bridge. Well, this is about as far as I got, because what happened is when I got my leg to about this position, a man came around the corner off the bridge, had a suit on, and he turned around and he told me that I wasn't going to be there. And I guess I was younger and more spunky at that time, because I told him, you and who else is going to keep me off the bridge? And he pulled out an identification card and he said, I'm with the CIA. And I said, well, that's enough muscle. I'll leave. So I turned around and I brought my leg back over like this. I walked down the fence line here about halfway. And I was looking over the fence to see if I could get a good shot of the parade. And he come back up and he told me, he says, I told you to get out of this area. And I said, okay. So I walked the complete length of the fence, got around on the other side. That's when I started to line up my frame so that I could take the picture of the parade. I had been panning shots through here so that I could get whatever was going to come down the street. And I saw that it was the President of the United States. And as I was panning down this direction, just as I got to about this position, a shot come right past my left ear. And that meant it would have had to come from this direction. And that's when I fell down. And to me, it seemed like a second shot was at least fired over my head. There's a bunch of report going on in this particular area at that time. And what happened was that while I was laying on the ground, it seemed like a gentleman came from this particular direction. And I thought it was a police officer because he had a uniform of a police officer. But he didn't wear a hat, and he had dirty hands. But it didn't really matter much at that time, because with him crying like he was, and with him shaking when he had the weapon in his hand, I think I'd have gave him almost anything except the camera, because that was my mother's. And literally what the man did was kick me and asked me if I was taking a picture. I told him that I was. And when I looked at the weapon, it was about that big around, and I decided I'd let him go ahead and have the film. I gave it to him, and then he went back off in this direction. I went off in this direction, and 3 days later, I was in Alaska. And I didn't come back to the United States for about 18 months.
We spent a lot of time studying the picture and looking at little details, and I guess in the back of our minds was a story that had come out 4 years earlier by a man named Gordon Arnold, who claimed to be a witness to the assassination and claimed to have been standing up by the fence. And there was a light blob of something very close to where Badgeman was. We weren't sure what it was, but gradually as details started coming out with Jack's photo work, we realized that this image was probably Gordon Arnold. And here's a guy who had told his story just to an acquaintance and was overheard, and that story went off to the news media, and Gordon Arnold was interviewed, and it appeared in the newspaper that he had been at the scene and was in that location, but no one believed him because there were no photographs or films that showed a man in that position. But all of a sudden, the Mormon picture confirmed his story. And again, the interesting part is that Gordon Arnold's story came out 4 years before we noticed the appearance of this figure in the Mormon photograph.
We later learned that Arnold was wearing this army cap that had a slight point at the top and a medallion on the right-hand side that said U.S. Army, and it's exactly what we see in the photograph. We also know that Gordon Arnold was filming this scene with a movie camera, and that's exactly what the photograph shows, because we see the right arm of the person in this position with his hand up toward his face and what appears to be obstructing his face, something perhaps like a movie camera.
All right, you want to check that measurement once again?
Yeah, this is about...
Gary and Jack's work has been verified and duplicated by independent experts in Great Britain. Measurements taken in Dealey Plaza and from Mary Ann's original camera confirm that it was possible for the badgeman figure to have fired the fatal headshot.
And excellent view of the street from here. See the center lane, which is where the president was, and see that whole lane for almost the entire period. It's a great position to be in.
But the photograph had yet more to reveal.
I was sitting in my office here one day looking at the picture, and I saw just all of a sudden, what appeared to be another image standing directly behind the badge man. This appears to be a person in a hard hat and a white t-shirt. The lighting on him is entirely consistent with the lighting on badge man. In other words, there's a highlight on the construction helmet that he seemed to be wearing. There's a shadow of his head down on his shoulders, and the lighting source is absolutely consistent with the rest of the picture. He appears to be looking off in the direction of the school book depository.
It was important in all this work that we develop somehow some independent corroboration for what we were seeing. And one of the important and yet often neglected witnesses in the Kennedy case is a railroad signalman named Lee Bowers, who was working in a railroad tower behind the picket fence and behind the grassy knoll. And he had a good view of the area where we see these figures. And he testified to the Warren Commission and told them that when Kennedy appeared in Dealey Plaza, there were two men behind the fence that he could see. And these two men were in this one position the whole time before, during, and after the shooting.
Lee Bowers died in a mysterious car accident 2.5 years after the assassination. This colorized version of the badgeman picture was shown to Gordon Arnold for the first time. He has always believed there was no proof of his presence on the knoll that day.
Looks like a soldier in summer uniform with an overseas cap on. It looks like it would have been my uniform. It looks like there's a camera, or there's something up in front of the face. It looks like a white spot. If it's a flash, it would be like off of a muzzle flash. This looks like a police officer, because that would be the badge. That would be the arm emblem. Would this fella back here be the railroad man I asked you about this morning? Because when I was walking to the site, and I had never told anybody that I had, when we were out there filming, it reminded me that there was a railroad worker just standing out there by the railroad tracks. But it looks like somebody's taking a picture. Yeah, I couldn't figure out why would I be standing crooked until I flipped that up, and if that's a muzzle blast or flash, then whoever's standing there would have been a fool to stand up straight. He'd been trying to get away from harm's way is what it boils down to. And that could very well be me. gun. That would be the closest thing that I've ever, to be honest with you, the picture bothers me because if this is a true thing of what has occurred, then I could be the only one that saw the man. They killed the president. And to be honest with you, if I'd have known this, I wouldn't have given the interview. That it's too close to home right now.
If the figure is real, then that means the witnesses were correct, and the researchers who have spoken of conspiracy for 25 years now were also correct. It means the Warren Commission was wrong. There was a conspiracy. The question then is, who was involved in the conspiracy? And alongside with that is, was Lee Harvey Oswald involved in the conspiracy? One of the good things the Warren Commission did was literally itemize the last few days of Lee Harvey Oswald's life. And the problem for the Warren Commission now would become, well, he had no opportunity to be with other people to plan something like this. So we now have to wonder seriously, perhaps for the first time, whether Lee Harvey Oswald even fired any shot.
The world will never know the true facts of what occurred, my motives. The people that had so much to gain and had such an ulterior motive for putting me in a position I'm in will never let the true facts come above board to the world.
Now, these people are in very high positions, Jack?
Yes.
Allen Dulles, director of the CIA, until Kennedy fired him, was one of the commissioners responsible for producing the 26-volume Warren Report on the president's assassination. The American media were glowing in their praise of the report that concluded Lee Harvey Oswald was alone responsible. It was only under closer scrutiny that the superficiality of its findings became clear.
The Warren Commission decided that there were 3 shots fired, and the first shot struck the president in the back, exited his throat, went on to strike Governor Connolly in the back and exited in his right chest, and then went through his right wrist and then wound up embedded in his thigh, and the bullet fell out at Parkland Hospital. The Warren Commission also decided the second shot probably missed and flew off into Dealey Plaza somewhere. And the commission decided that the third shot struck the president in the head and killed him. And that's the official version of what happened. And it's interesting, one of the early researchers pointed out that no witness at any time has ever described the assassination as having happened that way. Only the Warren Commission came up with that interpretation, and it's the single assassin theory.
On the morning of the assassination, Bill and Gail Newman had gone down to Dealey Plaza with their children to watch the presidential motorcade pass. They were the closest spectators to the tragedy, and their account is echoed by many others who were there.
The first 2 shots, I didn't realize what they were, but the third shot, after it was fired, I heard Mrs. Kennedy scream, "Oh no, they've shot Jack," and it was just sort of sent a chill over you. It was just terrible.
I can remember seeing the side of the president's ear and head come off. I remember a flash of white and the red and just bits and pieces of flesh exploding from the president's head. At that time, I turned to Gail and said, "That's it, hit the ground." And we turned and hit the ground and covered our children. When the third shot was fired, I thought it came from directly behind towards the grassy knoll behind me. I based that primarily on the third shot from what I saw of the side of the president's head coming off and from the sound of the rifle, the report of the rifle.
As the official story started coming out and hearing that the shots came from the building, these witnesses started to doubt their own ears. So as the days went by, fewer and fewer of these witnesses would come forward because they just all of a sudden weren't really sure about what they had heard. They were convinced on November 22, '63 that at least 1 shot came from the front. But by 4 or 5 days later, then they weren't sure and they didn't come forward at all.
Mary Woodward, was a junior reporter on the Dallas Morning News who had joined the lunchtime crowds in Dealey Plaza to watch the Kennedy motorcade. She was the journalist closest to the tragedy and rushed back to her office to file the story in a state of great consternation.
They first of all took me to the office nurse and had me have a tranquilizer because they thought was somewhat hysterical. I think I was behaving quite rationally under the circumstances. But anyhow, I then sat down and wrote the story immediately and actually had completed the story before the news was absolutely confirmed that he was even dead. So the story was absolutely my own impressions. It was not from anything anyone had said or what I had read or heard. Some things I have often said I would hate to swear before a court of law or before God, but one thing I am totally positive of in my own mind is how many shots there were, and there were 3 shots. The second 2 shots were immediate. It was almost as if one were an echo of the other. They came so quickly. The sound of one did not cease until the second shot. With the second and third shots, I did see the president being hit. I literally saw his head explode. So I felt that the shots had come, as I wrote in my article, from behind me and to my right, which would have been in the direction of the grassy knoll and the railroad overpass.
Because it contradicted the sole assassin theory, Mary's eyewitness account was quickly pulled and her version discounted.
Civic leaders, responsible people, whether it be the mayor, the managing editor of the paper, almost felt it a responsibility to kind of not rock the boat, perhaps. The neat answer was the version that came to be the most widely accepted, that there were 3 shots and they had all come from the school book depository building and they were all fired by Lee Harvey Oswald.
We do know that the FBI, as the official investigative body for the Warren Commission, apparently collected all the possible evidence it could find that indicated Lee Harvey Oswald did it and did it alone. Other evidence that pointed to perhaps other people or other locations for shooters was either ignored or deemed to be mistaken or misinterpreted.
I was interviewed by the FBI, but I did not testify before the Warren Commission. It's my understanding the reason I did not go before the Warren Commission was because in my statement that I thought the shots came from directly behind implied the shots were coming from the grassy knoll. This is something apparently the Warren Commission did not want to hear. They wanted to keep the direction of the assassination in the direction of the school book depository.